You're listening to the Immortal Icons of Dance podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Johnson. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the photographer Martha Swope. Although Martha was a dancer and even attended the School of American Ballet for a little while, Martha is an immortal icon of dance because of how many hundreds of dancers and productions she immortalized with her photography. It's almost without a doubt that if you are in the field of dance or theater at all, that you have seen some of Martha's images, whether you realize it or not. Despite how prolific she was, very few people know much about the woman behind the camera who captured 4 decades of dance and Broadway history. Born in Texas in 1928, Martha Swope graduated from Baylor University before attending the School of American Ballet in New York City. While at the school, she met Jerome Robbins, who was preparing to choreograph West Side Story for Broadway. Robbins, who was also an amateur photographer, had a dark room in his apartment and invited Martha to use it, as he always saw her with her camera in hand. Eventually, Robbins invited her to shoot rehearsals for West Side. Martha's photography career really took off when some of her photos of West Side Story landed in Life magazine. Lincoln Kirstein, the general director of New York City Ballet and head of the School of American Ballet, suggested that she didn't have a future as a dancer, but offered Martha a job as the first official photographer for the New York City Ballet. Her experience as a dancer allowed her to understand the structure of music and choreography, to know exactly when to snap the picture, to get the height of a dancer's leap or the emotional intensity of a Broadway performer's scene. During her career, Martha documented over 800 ballet and Broadway productions, everything from candid rehearsal shots to posed studio shots to live performance shots. Martha is most closely associated with the New York City Ballet, but she also documented almost every other major dance company, including American Ballet Theater, Dance Theater of Harlem, Martha Graham Dance Company, the Joffrey, and so many more. She also captured opera productions, music groups, circus, film, and television too. Her extensive collection is now preserved at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, where anyone can view them for pleasure or research. There are over 1.5 million images of hers in the library, both black and white and color, on contact sheets with corresponding negatives, transparencies, slides, and prints. Of the 1.5 million images, about 50,000 of them have been digitized and are available for anyone to view online at any time in the library's digital collection. Having chronicled so many Broadway productions, she earned a special honor from the Tony Awards for Excellence in Theater in 2004 and was granted a Lifetime Achievement Award from the League of Professional Theater Women in 2007. Talking to us today about Martha is her close friend, Delia Peters. Delia began dancing around 8 years old and soon became a student at the School of American Ballet, performing in the children's roles with the New York City Ballet, like in Nutcracker and Medea. Delia joined the company at 16 and spent 2 decades performing under Balanchine and Robbins. While dancing, she studied at Fordham University, and after retiring from dance, she worked at City Ballet as an archivist and a photographer and videographer. She then attended law school at Columbia University and became an attorney. In addition to knowing Martha in a professional setting, Delia and Martha were close personal friends and remained so until the end of Martha's life. Stay tuned at the end of this episode for a bonus interview. Today on the podcast, I'd like to welcome Delia Peters. She's here to talk about her great friend, Martha Swope. We know Martha as a photographer. We see her photos all over the place in books and other publications. And today I'd really like to get to know more about her as a person and as a friend.
First of all, Lauren, thank you for inviting me. I've never done a podcast, so this is a first. So ask away.
All right. Well, can you start by telling me how you began dancing and how you ended up at SAB?
I was a youngster. I was the first girl born in my family, and I was a runt, an absolute runt. And my male cousin, who was born 4 months before me, was a stocky little guy. And so all the older family members thought there was something wrong with me. Well, my mother took me to the then GP, And he said, she's as healthy as an ox. Take her to dance school. They'll put muscles on her and your family will think she's gaining weight. I never wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to stay home Saturday mornings and watch cartoons like my friends. So we lived in Queens, and there was a local ballet school taught by a wonderful Latvian woman. And my mother got me there on Saturday mornings by saying, we'll go to the library afterwards and get you a book. I love to read. So that's how she got me there. After 1 year, with me crying my way through most of the lessons, the teacher said to my mother, she really has talent. I was around 8 or 9 years old. You have to take her into Manhattan to either the ABT school or SAB. Go watch their performances and see which company you like the best in case she goes forward. Hence, SAB. So that's how I began at SAB, where I met several people who are still my close friends.
So when exactly in your trajectory of being a student, being in the company, when did you meet Martha?
I was a child in Nutcracker like everybody else. And my first year I was a bird and a soldier. They don't have birds anymore. My second year I was party scene Polichinelle. My third year I was party scene Polichinelle. And Martha was a young photographer at the time, but taking pictures at City Ballet. And to make some money, she would take photographs of the children whose parents wanted them to be photographed in the costumes. And she would do this between matinee and evening. And my mother said, oh yes, we have to get pictures. So that's how I first, quote unquote, met Martha. We didn't become friends until many, many years later. But that was my first encounter.
Yeah. And so you said between the matinee and the evening, so it was at City Center? Was it in one of the dance studios?
That was at City Center.
Was it in one of the studios that she would set up, or?
No, there was a large studio, I think it was on the 3rd floor, where the children got dressed and did their makeup. And so at one end of this large studio, she would set up her little dais and put down her drop cloth and whatever else she wanted and set up.
Did she, especially working with children, did she recommend the poses? Did she tell you how to pose? Or did she say, show me some of your choreography? How did the shoot work?
Well, Martha, having been a dancer at SAB, she knew what the poses were. And she had seen Nutcracker umpteen times. She had been an angel in Nutcracker when there were only 6 angels at City Center.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, there we go. And so she knew the choreography and she knew what the Polichinelles did. So she would demonstrate. She would say, okay, do this one, point your foot here, look this way, do that. So that's how we did our photos. Martha was directing us.
Can you tell us about what happened between that first photo shoot with her and when you became friends with her?
Well, I joined the company when I was 16, literally the day after I turned 16. And Martha, of course, at that time was a well-established dance photographer and Broadway. So I met her when she would do the souvenir program books, and we had some mutual acquaintances. And we began having dinners with these people, and we discovered that we had a lot in common. She was very intelligent. She never went to college. Let me qualify that by saying she entered college. She grew up in Waco, Texas. And she went to college for maybe 1 semester and decided, no, I'm taking too many courses I have no interest in. So that was that. But she was always a reader. She loved to read. And she was very intelligent. And at one point, I know you don't know this either, her mother, she had 2 siblings. So she and her mother came to New York, and let me try to remember this, yes. And she was a contestant on the $64,000 question. Shy, meek little Martha. And she said, I came with my little white gloves on and my little hat coming from Waco in the 50s. And she lasted a couple of rounds, and then that was it.
Wow.
But she loved New York from that. And she decided she was going to come and be a student at SAB.
So how old would she have been then when she came and was a contestant?
I don't know, but it was in, I would say, early 50s.
Okay.
I have no idea. There was one thing that Martha was Well, there were two things that Martha was very secretive about, even with me. One was her age, and the second one was her age. Even sometimes when we traveled and our passports would be in our hotel room safe, and I would need my passport for some reason, and I would take both out, she would grab hers. So, okay. She was very funny about it. Whatever her age was, she never looked it or behaved it. Anyway, so we became very friendly because we had many interests. She liked history, I liked history. She liked to travel, I liked to travel. She was inquisitive about life, so was I. We both liked ruins, archaeology. And so at one point we began traveling together to see the things that we had always read about. And so that really started the whole relationship. Plus we knew so many people in common. And so we did a lot of traveling. We did the usual Spain and Portugal, but we also did, let's see if I can get this in any kind of order. We went to Kenya and Egypt and Morocco. And Machu Picchu, the Galapagos, the Amazon, Hong Kong. We traveled in the days when it was safer to travel. This was in the 70s. I mean, obviously there was a lot going on in the world then, but less so than now. So it was safe for two women traveling alone, which is what we did. We traveled alone. We'd find a travel agent who had ties to the country we wanted to go to, and that person would arrange for us to have an agent when we got to the country. And so very often we would also have a government guide with us, not only our tourist guide. So it was very interesting. We never had any problems. We were stranded in Egypt in Abu Simbel one time because there was one hotel with 20 rooms. This is right on Lake Nasser. And the people who were in there, the plane that came in to take them out, I believe blew a tire. And in those days, there weren't any other small planes. It was a teeny tiny airport, teeny tiny. And so they stayed in their rooms, and they put those of us who flew in earlier into the rooms, the houses, quote unquote, of the workers who moved Abu Simbel from the ground level on the river up higher so it wouldn't be flooded when they built the dam. It was an experience. The beds were like bananas. You know, they were curved. There were no pillows, and whatever was in there, it looked like it was still from those days. So Martha and I elbowed our way into this one room that had twin beds. Everybody else had to share beds. But it was fabulous because we were the only two Americans. And two of the English people, I guess a couple, they kind of adopted us. And the hotel would have us come over for food. They ran out of food and drink very early, and they would have to feed us by fishing in Lake Nasser. And there were no phones at that time, and they had to use a wireless to talk to anybody saying, we have a lot of people who are stranded here. Can you find a plane or a tire or something?
How long were you stranded?
3 days.
Okay.
But it was fabulous because it's at the juncture of 3 different deserts, the red one, the white one, and the black one. And there was nobody there. There was no police. There was nobody. And Martha and I would just go wandering around these desert areas, and with the sun setting, they were the most incredible scenes. We probably took many photographs. We seemed to take a photograph of every single hieroglyph that was in Egypt. Everything we saw, we had to take a picture of. I say we because traveling with Martha and watching her do her photography, I became interested in photography, and she said, well, you have to get a Pentax, and with this lens and that lens. And so as we went along, she taught me photography. That's another whole story. But anyway, finally they sent a plane in, and it brought a spare tire, but it was only a little 2-seater. But they would have us go out to the airport every day in case a plane came. So this little 2-seater came, and we're sitting there and we're watching them put the tire on the other plane that had blown the tire. And I thought, well, this is dumb, and I'd always liked to fly. So Martha was, I will say, a nervous Nelly. she was not a daring person. But I just walked out to the plane with the pilot and said, can you maybe teach me how to taxi? So there I am in this little plane with this Egyptian pilot, and he's showing me how to taxi around this teeny-weeny airport. And years later, in retrospect, I thought, he could have flown off with me and nobody would have known where we went.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you're young, you do things.
Yeah.
So anyway, she sat there and watched me in shock. So that was our big adventure, really, in terms of unscheduled adventures.
Yeah, yeah.
But we always had great trips and great guides.
Was there any place that you guys loved so much that you would return to?
No, there was too much else of the world to see.
Yeah.
And actually the only place, of all the places we went, no, I've been to Hong Kong twice since then. Once when City Ballet went, more recently. Mm-hmm. I was retired then and I had time and I said, I love Hong Kong, I'm going. Mm-hmm. But I did go back to Egypt 2 years ago. And I got a brochure, it was great, and along with Egypt, it had Jordan, and I'd never been to Jordan. So it was fascinating, the changes, of course, in 50 years.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, there were only 9 of us on this tour, and this other older couple from Texas had also been there 50 years before, at almost the exact same time.
Wow.
So, you know, comparing stories about, do you remember when?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm getting off Martha.
What about, so you started to mention her teaching you about photography. Would you guys develop anything while you were traveling, or you would just keep it all until you got
No,
back
because
to the
in those days, it was rolls of film.
Yeah.
So you needed a darkroom. And we weren't there to do what she does for work.
Yeah.
We were there to just keep taking more and more pictures. And she never developed color photos. That she sent out to the lab.
Oh.
But she had her own darkroom, and her first darkroom wasn't hers. She already knew Jerry Robbins because, and I'm not sure who it was at SAB when she was a student, and she was always tall and thin, gorgeous long legs. And I've seen photographs of her doing poses. Somebody, I think she told me it was Lincoln Kirsten, said to her, Martha, you might as well quit and find something else to do. You're too tall. You'll never be a dancer. Well, if you're going to have your career ended then and there, it might as well be by a genius. Yeah. You know? So then I don't know who suggested that she pick up the camera. Maybe she always had an interest. But anyway, she had another friend in Waco, Tommy Abbott, who was a dancer with her. And he came to New York at some point also, didn't take dance at SAB, but became a Broadway dancer, lo and behold, in West Side Story. So he kind of introduced her to Jerry, which is why she became a Broadway photographer, because she did West Side Story. And Jerry was interested in photography and had a darkroom in his house and let Martha use his darkroom. So she used his until she finally got her own darkroom, which she lived on 72nd Street in a walk-up. And she took a second apartment in there, and that she converted to her darkroom. And also her studio, where she took photographs, setups. And it was very interesting to have these Broadway luminaries and these ballet stars walking up 3 or 4 flights of stairs to get to her studio. But they did it, unquestionably. And so as she became more involved in photography and she had more and more clients, she began taking people as her assistants and training them. And whether or not they knew a lot about photography, she could tell whether they would be trainable, to coin a word. And one of them was Carol Rosegg, who just had an exhibit here at the Dance Library with Joan Marcus. And Joan and Martha knew each other, of course, and when Martha retired from photography, Joan and Carol shared a studio. So it all becomes very incestuous.
Yes.
But anyway, it was a fabulous exhibit. Carol and I became very friendly, and we occasionally have lunch with another person, Susan Cook. So she also, early on, this is where I need my cheat sheet, Jerry Goodstein was, I think, the first person I met. And I was always fascinated because he would have his caption, his name under the photographs, but they were his clients. She allowed her assistants to have their own clients. And then they had their names under. Otherwise, it was Martha's name. Another one, of course, Paul Kolnick. And he was with Martha for several years. She taught him everything. Very, very wonderful photographer. He's had many exhibits and books. Then when he was thinking about retiring, before that, he had his own assistant who was now photographing the New York City Ballet, Erin. And you can see, I could always tell when a photograph was by somebody that Martha had trained because of the lighting. In her studio, ultimately she moved the studio to 42nd Street, where she also moved. She had a setup. She knew exactly where her lights were going to go, and also even if they were doing setups after a performance on Broadway. She had her lighting scheme. And she said to me afterwards, you know, I really could have been a little bit more inventive sometimes, but it worked. And I could always tell without looking at the name underneath, whether it was Carol or Paul or somebody else who took the photograph, because they used the same lighting setup. Of course, that was before digital. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
But all of her associates became wonderful photographers in their own rights. And nice people. They learned from Martha how you work with people. Because on Broadway in particular, you have some superstars. And you have to learn how to work with these people who had mega egos. And you had to learn how to work with the stage crew and the union rules.
Oh, yeah.
So Martha was very, I won't say she was friendly, but she respected the crew. They knew that. And sometimes they would turn their backs a little bit when she had to do something.
Yeah.
You know, like 5 minutes over, they would just go, okay, it's Martha. And same thing with the crew at the New York City Ballet. She was very respectful of them and their union rules, and they appreciated that. Likewise, she would get some of the luminaries from the ballet world. I mean, Baryshnikov, and I can't even begin to name them. They were all in her studio at some point or another. And they trudged up the stairs. So that was something her assistants learned also, how to work with people. Difficult people. Some of them could be. Not the dancers. The dancers were never difficult. When you work with the likes of Balanchine and Jerry Robbins, you are not difficult. But some of the Broadway people, especially those maybe who came from Hollywood, they could be a little bit, I use the word difficult very lightly. But she also did a lot of black and white touch-ups of photographs. And she was brilliant at it. She used a single edge blade razor, and I would see her just delicately scraping the top of a black and white print. Never so that you saw the white underneath, but just so that the wrinkle would come out, the dark wrinkle. She was a master at this. And of course you couldn't do anything with the color at that point. But she taught, of course, her assistants how to do all this. And she taught me how to do it. And how she could get into the darkroom, and she loved working in the darkroom. She would get in there and say, okay, this is for the newspaper. It has to be high definition.
Yeah.
But maybe for a magazine article or maybe for a book, it didn't have to be that high def. And she was very adept at knowing what she needed to do, whether it was in the early stage or whether she was developing it. So she was really a superb photographer, self-taught, absolutely self-taught.
So self-taught, is that just by trial and error or reading books or asking?
Trial and error.
Really?
She had no one to turn to. Maybe she asked Jerry a little bit, but don't forget, having been a dancer, she knew how to photograph dance. She knew that you listened to the music, and she loved music. And when you knew a crescendo was coming, something was going to happen with the choreography. And so she was there and ready. She began using the assistants when she really needed to use a light meter. Because if she was shooting something during a performance, whether Broadway or dance, very, very difficult to use a light meter in one hand and try to shoot with only one hand. It didn't work. So her assistants became very good at reading the light meter, which was very important. And she always shot black and white, and the assistants would shoot color.
So that's how you can tell, one of the ways that you can tell the difference. So anything that's color.
No, she also shot color when an assistant wasn't with her.
Oh, okay.
Definitely in the studio, she would go back and forth. Anything she had control over, she could go back and forth. But it was just easier if she was doing candids during a performance to have an assistant shooting the color. So of course she had her exhibits, and I did an exhibit with her.
Really?
I would shoot dance, and because the crew knew me, I was a dancer in the company, and they liked me, and they knew I wasn't going to make $1 million off any of their shots. But she and I had an exhibit with Carolyn George, who was Jacques D'Ambois' wife. She had been a dancer in the company and married Jacques and had 4 children, 2 of whom became professional Broadway and dance people. And when she finally got rid of the 4 of them, she took up photography. Same thing, she had the eye to take it. And so the 3 of us together were approached to have an exhibit at Lincoln Center in an exhibit space that was underneath one of the theaters. And it was the 3 female dance photographers. Wow. Many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
So that was great fun.
Do you have any like brochure from that, or any any pictures of the exhibit? Nothing?
Interestingly enough, there was I had a triptych of Suzanne Farrell and Don Q, which one woman came in and she went, "Oh, I have to have that." And she bought it.
Wow.
And I would say maybe, then I had no further contact with her. And I would say maybe 3-4 years ago, I got a phone call from this woman. She introduced herself and said, "You won't remember me, but I'm the one who bought the triptych." And we just chatted. She didn't want anything else. We just chatted. So that was really nice.
Yeah.
And of course, Martha did many exhibits all over the place. And I helped her with a couple. Exhibits are very, very difficult. You can ask any photographer, Carol, Joan, Paul, who do them on a fairly regular basis. It takes months of going through your photographs and selecting. Do you want them to be, well, in Martha's case, do you want them just to be dance? Do you want them to be Broadway? Do you want them to be, like she photographed Martha Graham also. So do you want them to be just about Martha Graham, Martha and Martha? Or do you want them to be City Ballet or ABT or mix? It's a very, very long, strenuous time period that you do this. Then you have to get them blown up. Then you have to decide, do I want them actually framed, or do I want them matted, or what do I want? Paul did an exhibit at the 92nd Street Y several years ago, and it was brilliant. It was all New York City Ballet, and he would have, say, Kieran Nichols doing a pas de chat with one leg out in front of her, and her arm would be over that leg, parallel to it. And then the next photograph would be maybe Peter Martins and Apollo pointing to the right, so that their fingers looked like they were meeting each other. Very, very cleverly done. Paul, it was a brilliant idea of Paul's. And so you had to think about these things. So a lot of work and money went into these things. And she did one, I know, for charity downtown, but it took a lot of time away from your actual work. You know, so you had to plan things very carefully. And also we were very lucky because Martha could say to her clients, well, I'm unavailable during this period of time to do anything. Well, yeah, that's because that's when I had the layoff from the company between seasons and we would travel. So she would arrange her schedule around mine. It was fun.
As always, I highly encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. There's a video version of every episode if you're more of a visual learner, but beyond that, I've created a playlist of videos that are relevant to each episode. More than anything, I want this podcast to be a gateway or a launching point for you to begin investigating a piece of dance history that you maybe haven't engaged with before. My interviews could never capture the entirety of someone's experience with these great icons of dance, but the conversations we have here can lead to you discovering more. The playlists include old interviews with the dance icon, vintage footage of them dancing, and I've also included links to books that they've written. I try to provide as many avenues as possible for you to continue your own learning experiences.
Her family didn't travel to New York, so occasionally she would go home while her mother was still alive for the holidays. And then her mother passed away, and she would come to my parents for holidays. Mm-hmm. The other thing that Martha and I liked to do was play cards. We were avid card players, puzzle doers. And I remember when we all got sick of New Year's Eve, Martha and my parents and myself would play cards on New Year's Eve for a penny a point. And we'd stop to watch the ball go down, and then we'd go back to playing cards. So we shared a lot of interests.
Yeah.
And because of our traveling, we got to meet people together, and we would stay in touch with some of them. Mm-hmm. Well, this one couple we met in Machu Picchu, there's a funny picture there. I think we had the man on the sacrificial stone, and we were over him pretending we were going to hit him with daggers. Uh-huh. So they were in Boston, and they came to New York one time, and we all had dinner. That was really nice. Another time we were on the plane from Guayaquil to the boat in the Galapagos, and we're sitting there, Martha and I are together, and we had the aisle, and people were there, and we're about 600 feet up, and this man leaps up from across the aisle, stands in front of me and says, "Aren't you Delia Peters?" I was like, whoa, there's no place to run. So it turns out he and his wife were balletomanes, and they recognized me. And then, of course, I introduced Martha. We became great friends.
Wow.
They lived in New York. He was a lawyer for the Taxi Commission. She was a scientist. And so we met several times. Great fun. So we had a lot of these commonalities.
Yeah.
I think I'm completely off the track of whatever your question was.
No, that's okay. You're telling great stories that I wouldn't even know to ask about. You've mentioned, the Broadway luminaries, trekking up the steps and being in her apartment. Were you ever watching her shooting, watching her work?
No.
No, okay.
First of all, it's too distracting to the person who doesn't know me.
Yeah.
Why are you here? And I had other things to do, probably a rehearsal or two. No, but I did on occasion meet some of these people, like Patti LuPone, Tommy Tune. And as a matter of fact, I was very lucky in that on occasion when she usually only had one assistant at a time, there was a period when she had Susan and Carol at the same time. But if they were off doing their own work and she needed an assistant, she would call on me. And one time she called and said, "Have you ever been to Kentucky?" I said, "No." She said, "We're going to Nashville." It was an out-of-town tryout for a Tommy Tune production.
Wait, Nashville, Tennessee?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Tennessee? Or
You're
was
right.
it someplace else in Kentucky?
You're right. I think it was Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Okay.
But it was either Kentucky or Tennessee. And it was a Tommy Tune. They were coming to Broadway, and it was called Buskers. And it was great. We took the photographs. There was supposed to be a dog in it, but they used a puppet. And it was fabulous. Unfortunately, they got to New York, and Tommy broke his leg. And so the show never opened in New York. But he was absolutely wonderful in it. The whole production was brilliant. Singing, dancing, it made you walked out and you felt good. It was one of those productions. And so I met him also. I met Chita Rivera on another shoot. I also met, not that I had anything to do with the shoot, John Travolta. Martha and I, for some bizarre reason, were having lunch in Tavern on the Green, the old one. I don't know why we were in there. We never went there. So we're sitting there, and this man comes up and says, "Martha," and it's John Travolta. Nicest person, just charming, and talkative. And of course, Martha introduced me, and he included me in the conversation, which was really sweet. Yeah. And then he went back to his luncheon party. So Martha, when I say she had good relations to people, this is what would happen. People would see her someplace and stop and come over. I don't think she ever had bad words with anyone. Martha didn't. Martha was one of the nicest people ever. Rarely got angry. She didn't like confrontation. There were times when she stood her ground about things, but always in a nice way. She was a very decent human being, a huge animal lover. Huge. She supported so many charities, animal charities. She always had at least one cat, a stray. I remember way back when I met her, she had four cats in this tiny walk-up apartment. She never did that again, but but they were great. She always took in strays and found homes for strays. She had relationships. I had relationships. We only double dated once. And we knew everything about each other's relationships. We became like sisters, very close. We knew everything about each other. And it was really a very warm relationship. And even when she got sick towards the end, we were still friends. And I got her round-the-clock aids. And I would still go up to the apartment, and we would try to do a jigsaw puzzle. And it became more and more difficult for her to do things like that. But I don't think most people knew how sick she was after she retired. And that's not why she retired. She retired because the age of technology came in, and digital photography came in. And she said she barely knew how to use a cell phone. Barely. She never got a smartphone. It was always the flip phone. So she said, I can't do it. I cannot learn digital photography at this point. It's too much. And she felt like it was time for her to retire. So she retired, and that was it.
Do you think, did she have a sort of self-awareness of how important her work was to documenting history, or was it more just about the present moment and it's a job and, I'm helping, advertise this show or, whatever? Was it more about the present, or did she have an awareness of?
No, she had an awareness. Okay. Because she took photographs of Balanchine, and she took Martha Graham, and as these people would pass on, of course, she was aware of how important her photographs were. And even documenting choreography that was no longer existing and dancers who had retired. Yeah, she was aware of the historical aspect, which is why she was so concerned about what was going to happen to her collection when she retired.
Can you talk some more about that?
And thank goodness it's here at the dance collection.
Yeah.
And being cataloged and being digitalized. Yeah, she was very aware of that. And that's why I think she was very aware of how she took a photograph, knowing that it was going to be part of history. And interestingly enough, history is fleeting. Fame is fleeting. After she retired, and she was still able to use photographs from her collection here, she said, I have all these fabulous photographs of all these amazing dancers and actors, and all people want is Nureyev and Baryshnikov and, some of the Suzanne and Mr. B. They're not interested in the other stuff. And she was a little bit upset about it. There was nothing she could do about it. She couldn't push her photographs on people. But she said, I can see it's really now for history. And nothing else. People are not going to use. And even now, how many photographs do you see of Misha or Rudy or even Peter Martins?
Yeah.
Who isn't that far gone, or Suzanne, or anybody. They've got a whole new group, as you well know, of these current dancers are now the important people. And that's fine. That's the way it goes.
Before we started recording, you were asking me kind of how I started doing these talks. And another part of my project an auxiliary, a separate part of it. I use Instagram, and I post a lot of Martha's photos every day. And so it corresponds with whatever performance they're doing on stage that night. I find a photo of the original cast and I post that. And I'll either post maybe the review that, was written on the opening night, or if it's a ballet that one of the dancers wrote about in their memoir, I'll write, their memory of it. And so I've been doing that for 4 years now. And so I'm not glad to hear that she was sad about that, but I'm glad to hear that she would be happy. I think that people are seeing her photos on a daily basis now, and that they're still part of the conversation of these ballets in the company. And, people are engaging with them and going, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, that ballet used to look like that because now it looks like this. Or, oh, when did that costume change? And I wonder why. And people are discussing in the comments, and it's, former company members and current company members. And so her work is still an active, part of the discussion.
Yeah, and it's a living work.
Yeah.
The Immortal Icons of Dance shop has gifts for lovers of dance and dance history. There, you'll find your favorite dancers on shirts, sweatshirts, and Christmas ornaments. There's also a collection of rare and vintage dance books and ballet programs that I've collected from all over and have made available for you. This season, there's a special Firebird ornament that I designed to commemorate the 100th birthday of Maria Tall Chief. They are handmade and limited edition, so be sure to get yours before they're gone. If you like the work being done here at Immortal Icons of Dance, there are several ways you can support. The easiest ways are to subscribe to the podcast and share the episodes when you enjoy them. For just $5 a month, you can join the Vault to gain exclusive access to a large collection of dance history ephemera that I've curated just for you. This includes historic photos, footage, quotes, articles, and more. Your support allows me to continue researching and preserving this history that we all love so much.
Did she have any little quirks or sayings or phrases that she would use, or?
Well, she came from Texas. So yeah, every now and then there would be a little Texas thing. I can't remember any right now, but not many. Not many, but I'd say, your Texas is showing. And they were cute little things.
Yeah.
No, I can't remember any.
That's all right. Do you have a favorite photo of hers that she took? And then secondary question, do you have a favorite photo of you with her?
I love the John Travolta poster. The white suit, one arm up, one arm out, and the hip. I love that poster. I think that's one of the most brilliant things she ever did.
Iconic.
And she chose the suit.
Really?
Yeah. She was out at the studio in Brooklyn where they were filming. And she took a lot of photographs there, but this, everybody agreed, this was the one. So for theatrical photographs, I think this is probably, maybe not the best known, but certainly the most appreciated, let's say. Dance-wise, she has a wonderful one of Mr. B. He loved cats, and he had a cat, and he's standing there in his apartment, and he's got one hand raised, and he's offering something to the cat, and the cat is leaping. I think that's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And it's not a dance photograph, but it's a dance photograph.
Yeah. Carol talked about that too, about that being one of her favorite photos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, sometimes you get these photos and they're by chance. There's no way you can plan these things. And that's one of them. That's fabulous. Photos of us together. We were so busy taking photos of everything standing next to each other. There is one photo, I came across it recently. We were in Spain, and the two of us were in our tourist garb, and our camera bags and our sunglasses, and some street photographer took a picture of it, the two of us walking. And if you didn't know who we were, you wouldn't know. I mean, it was just the two of us. But I think that's the only photograph I know of the two of us.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we took individual photographs of each other, but
yeah,
I can't think of any other.
Yeah. What about Do you have a favorite picture that she took of you, dance-wise, and then maybe also when you were traveling?
That's a toughie. She did, of course, being Martha, there was a camera company who came to her and they were developing a 3D camera. And the camera would take the 3D pictures. I think it was Nikon. I'm not sure. And she took the camera with her when we went to Spain. And we were at the Alhambra and she had me sitting up on a parapet. And they're very interesting pictures because they were 3D. The company decided against this mode of photography. It was very difficult, the development process. But I like some of those photographs. They're really interesting because of the 3D quality.
Yeah. Was it like two pictures that were taken from slightly different angles? And then...
It was something internal to the camera.
Oh, really?
And I don't know what it was. I'm not sure she understood exactly what the process was. But yeah, that didn't last long.
Yeah.
And then there were other pictures that she took of me here and there, which I liked. I can't think of any offhand. But she did use me, and I don't know why. She took some pictures of me in her studio wearing a large brimmed hat. And I was very young. It's very nice. I think I still have that. It's just a headshot. And I have no idea why we did that. But no, nothing in my mind stands out. I never liked being photographed, which is a difficult issue to get over when you're
on stage and performing.
Well, when you're traveling with a photographer. I was like, no, and she didn't like to be photographed either.
Oh, really?
So it was pretty funny. So that pretty much answers that question.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to make sure that people know about her?
I think you had another question about her social relationships.
Yes, yeah, with the company. Was she sort of separate? Did she keep a distance with her subjects, or was she integrated with the company or the Broadway community?
Martha was a very private person, very private, and shy. And so, yes, she had a small circle of good friends, a few of us, and some good acquaintances like Walter Terry. They were friendly, and he had a weekend place, and sometimes she would go up there for the day. She had a lot of invitations from theatrical people to have dinners, come to a party, I'm giving a party. She never went. Never. She never developed any of those. That wasn't her. Like I said, she was very private, and I don't know whether she thought being too friendly or intimate with people might make it more difficult to photograph them, because you couldn't say, you don't look too good doing that.
Yeah.
I think it was easier for her objectivity as a photographer if she did not have relationships with her actors and dancers. She was very friendly. She became very friendly with Tannikil, the clerk. She did the photographs for Tanny's cookbook. So yes, there was a relationship there. She was always friendly with Jerry. I became friendly. Oh, okay. Let's come full circle. So Tommy Abbott, I mentioned, who was in West Side Story, and he began staging Jerry's Broadway shows around the world. But at one point, Jerry had choreographed so many ballets when he returned to the company in the early 80s. Jerry said, I need my own ballet master, and guess who? It was Tommy. So Tommy became a ballet master at the New York City Ballet, so there were he and Martha again, developing a new relationship. And I was dancing, so I became very friendly with Tommy. So there was somebody from her past. It came full circle that she was working with this person.
Yeah.
And he was a lovely person too, charming. And he had very funny Broadway stories. Oh, and so we also became friendlier with Jerry. Of course, I worked with Jerry a lot. I was a Jerry dancer. And Martha and I sometimes, when we go on a trip someplace, and maybe Jerry had been there and he knew we were going, we would send him a funny postcard. So we had a funny little thing with Jerry. And so, no, she had her very close friends, maybe 3 or 4, and good acquaintances. And that was it. And she didn't even socialize really with her assistants. You know, it was a working relationship, very friendly, but it wasn't, oh, you know, maybe they go out for lunch, or after a show they'd go get a bite to eat because they were starving, but it wasn't a social thing. Yeah, she was a very private person and unassuming. Anybody who met Martha would never know anything about her or who she was or her fame in this world.
I've got one last question. It's a new one. One last question. Do you know what project or what work she was most proud of?
I don't think there was any one. I mean, she did do her own books, her photography books, and she was proud of those. I think she was just very proud of the photography that she did of everyone, and how she tried to make people look as good as possible if it was a setup, and to try to capture them in their performances that would really showcase not only the performer, but the work. She was always cognizant of, okay, that's the star in the show, but I need to be aware of where this fits into the general story of the show. So she wasn't just aiming for the star, she was also trying to get the other performers in there so that every photograph told a story.
Yeah.
And I think she was very proud of her ability to do that. And very proud that she learned to do this by herself and take good pictures.
Yeah.
I think that was probably it, but no one thing.
A lot of people owe to her a lot of their place in dance history, right? Is kind of recorded and cemented by her work.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And she never thought about getting into videos. She never, that was just not in her wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Still photography was always her thing.
Yeah.
And she appreciated other photographers. I mean, this Joan Marcus I mentioned, they knew each other. And of course, there's a rivalry to a degree. They were both Broadway photographers. Very good. But there was never any outward animosity, or even under the blanket animosity. It was just, there's enough for all of us. You know, we're all trying to do our best. And of course she respected Fred Fell and Costas and Herb Migdal and the other Broadway photographers who were coming up at that time. And still she did her own photography. She wasn't trying to copy anybody else. And she always told her assistants, you know, you can copy me, you can do what I do, but at some point, you know, go off and do your own style of photography if you want.
Yeah.
You know, so she was a very humble person.
Thank you very much for being here and talking about your friend Martha.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it. I think you asked very good questions.
Well, thank you.
I also spoke to Carol Rosegg, who was one of the assistants that Martha trained, who has gone on to have her own enormous theater photography career. Carol grew up in Prairie Village, Kansas, studied art history and French at Tufts University, and moved to New York City in the mid-1970s. After studying under and assisting Martha in large theater shoots like Dreamgirls and A Chorus Line, Carol, since 1994, has been a preeminent name in theater photography. We're here talking with Carol Rosegg about her experiences with Martha Swope, the famed dance and theater photographer.
She was a dancer also.
She was. Could you tell me first about your background in theater or photography before you met Martha?
Sure. I did a lot in college. I did a lot of what was called Torn Ticket. It was like a after-school club where we did musical comedy, and that's really how I got to New York, because all my friends were coming, so I came. So it was about a year after I was here. I was unemployed. I had a camera, and I had taken some photos of a friend's theater company where I met a press agent. And he said to me, Martha Swope needs someone. And I said, well, who is she? And he went, open any New York Times and you'll figure it out. So I was very bored. I was very unemployed. I would have frankly met anyone at that time. I called Martha, and she needed someone, and we met. I went to her studio. I played with her dog. She was a big animal rescuer. That was a very important part of her life. And then I found out later, of course, that the dog bites. But then by the time I was done, I had to go to unemployment, and she said, "Oh, come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow." At the end of the week, she said, "The hours are long, the pay is low, and I'd like a year's commitment." And I was 22, so I went, "Okay, sure." And it really totally changed my life. It was 1978, and she was very much at the height of her career. She was shooting American Ballet Theater, New York City Ballet, Martha Graham, Lincoln Center Theater, most all of Broadway, Annie, Chorus Line, 42nd Street. So here I was, this young person, able to go to the theater every night and learn from her. So it was like I canceled my life and had a whole new one.
Wow. What was your first impression of her, whether as a person or as an artist?
She was so down to earth, so not fancy, no airs. Even when we spoke on the phone and I said, "I have a camera, but I don't have a portfolio." And she went, "Oh, fine. I always like to look at portfolios for the pictures, but frankly, it doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me if it took you 15 rolls of film to get to that photo or what your circumstances were, so don't worry about it." And, she was an animal lover, which was wonderful. And just as down to earth, and she's from Texas, and that I think shone through.
Could you tell me anything about her style visually? What was the impression of her at that time?
How she looked?
Yeah.
She's tall, gangly. Her bangs were very important to her. She had a dancer's carriage because she had been a dancer, so she always stood in fifth position when she was shooting or anything else. Yeah.
Did Martha teach you in a hands-on, okay, today we're learning this, today we're learning that, or was it more watching by example?
It was definitely watching, and then she would correct or help or tell me what lenses I needed so that I would be able to assist her. But there was no sitting down and learning.
Early on, what were your responsibilities?
So I was low person on the totem pole. So basically we would go to the theater, watch the show. She would make if this was theater rather than dance, she'd make little stick figures of the setup she wanted to do later, talk with the press agent. There'd be a photo call after the show, usually ending around midnight. I would then go back to the studio and process the black and white film, hang it up, let it dry, come back in the morning, make contact sheets. Dance, we also did setups in dance, but there was a lot more in the moment dance.
Were you ever with her shooting New York City Ballet or watching her?
New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater, Martha Graham. Baryshnikov had already defected at that point, and he was also very big at that time. So I was able, and her assistants shot with her. She shot black and white, and her assistants shot color. So I shot all of those people with her.
Wow. Besides the obvious things, the technical aspects of photography, did you learn any little tricks of the trade from her, smaller things that maybe people wouldn't be aware of?
I don't know if I'd call it a trick of the trade, but not being a dancer myself, I didn't know about feet. And Martha was a stickler. She would never let a photo go out that everyone's feet weren't perfect. So I learned that, in toe, you have to go over your foot. The moments of dance. And again, it was from her learning that, because it meant a lot to her, and everyone had to look really good and really perfect, which is why everyone loved her, because they felt safe.
Beyond pointing the toes, beyond her being aware of dance from the inside out, within her own body, do you think there are other ways that being a dancer helped her career? Because she didn't just shoot dance, it was theater and other things as well.
Absolutely. So one of her friends was Jerome Robbins, and he was doing this little show, and he, said, "Martha, why don't you come take some pictures?" And it was West Side Story. So being in that community and having that access, her photos then ran in Life magazine and sort of launched her that way, because she had a little brownie that was taped up, and she would take pictures of her friends in School of American Ballet and all that. She had no photography training. She would go to B&H or some of the camera stores and say, how do I do this? And they would, teach her. So she was very much self-taught.
What was her personality like when working with maybe choreographers or directors, setting up shots, explaining what was needed? What was that like?
I don't know how to use this term nicely because it sounds bad to say that somebody's meek, but she was not a very aggressive person. So it was always a very calm, easygoing, and again, she was beloved and trusted. The dancers could trust their body with her, and knowing that, so that it was always pleasant and,
We talked about, I asked about her style, what she would wear visually, what was her style. Now her style in photography, if you were to see a photo run with no byline, how would you know? How would you be able to characterize her style?
I could only characterize a theater photo of hers.
Okay.
Her dance photos are not, I don't think, unique.
As distinct, yeah.
As distinct. Her style, though, theatrically, we would shoot on stage. We would do setups on stage, and her kind of imprimatur, or whatever you would call it, would be the star in the center, the star of the show, and then kind of going back behind would be the rest of the cast. So no one was not in the shot, no one was covered, no, there was never, everyone always was there, and it was a very not candid kind of look. And those are the photos that ran in the Times very, very large.
I don't know if this will exist or not based on what you've told me so far. Can you tell me a time that Martha had to deal with a difficult professional situation? Maybe someone who was, kind of pushing back on what she needed or wanted, and how did that resolve?
I couldn't think of any specific. At that time, and still, the theater photographer, the dance photographer, is really the low person on the totem pole. So it was never the needs of the photographer that are met. It's always the needs of the costume designer or the star who doesn't want to come out or whatever. So I can't say that she would ever push against that, because that just isn't how it works.
What would be either your happiest or funniest memory working with Martha? Or if there's several?
Very early on, she was a big animal rescuer, and she had a house out in Long Beach, and she would catch all the stray cats and have them neutered. But sometimes she couldn't get them in time. So at one point, she had a litter of kittens living in her bathroom above the studio. Her apartment was above the studio on 72nd Street. And my job was to go up and sit on the bathroom floor and play with the kitties. So that was very fun.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And the other part was, being exposed to, I was in the room with Michael Bennett. George Balanchine was alive. Baryshnikov had defected. All of these people who, it was amazing.
Yeah. Were you there for the 3,389th performance, the photo shoot for that?
Yes, we were sitting in the front row of the mezzanine.
Please tell me about it.
It was unbelievable. They had to redo the floor of the Schubert Theater to hold all of those people. So it was just sort of jaw-dropping and hugely exciting. And that's the thing. To be a party to all of that, how lucky was I?
Yeah. Every time I read or hear anything about that performance and the rehearsals leading up to it, I just instant chills. If I had a time machine, that's probably one of the first times
you would have had a good time.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Do you happen to have a favorite photo of hers?
You mean like that she took?
Yeah.
This was before my time, but she had a book called Mourka, which was Balanchine's cat. And I just think those photos are amazing. It's out of print.
I know, it's very hard to find.
I have it somewhere, but...
You do?
I do. Yeah, I don't know where it is, but I do have it.
Yeah, I need to find someone who has it and take a look.
I'll get back to you on it.
Okay. If you were giving advice to a young dancer theater photographer now, is there any advice that you would give, maybe that came from Martha, that you would pass on?
Unfortunately or fortunately, so much of it is about access, getting in. It's sort of what you were speaking about before. You know, not everyone does have access, and gaining that access is hard. So I would suggest, if they're young and they're wanting to be a dance photographer, they attach themselves to other young dancers and kind of let it go up. Like you photograph a dancer, and then maybe that dancer gets into a company and they give you an entree into that company. That's really kind of the only way to do it.
Yeah, that is unfortunate, but it is good, sound advice.
Yeah.
I mean,
the other side is, and this comes from sort of the other side of theater photography, if you can find a niche that hasn't been exploited and become that photographer, whether it's, you know, I'm just going to take dancers in the park, and you gather a hole and you do the top of the rock photography or something like that. That's another entree in. Or you just want to do dancers' feet, things like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is how I was able to start doing this podcast, was being already introduced to certain people around the theater who knew me and trusted me and saw my work in other ways. And so
it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because it's that access. If you called up cold, those people, they would go, who are you? Why? Why should I let you? So, yeah.
Or then you can at least, even if you are calling up someone cold, you can say, well, I've worked with so-and-so, or so-and-so knows me. And so it's all
connections, unfortunately, networking.
Yep. Yeah. Did you ever spend any personal time with her, you know, not on the job?
I mean, it would sort of mesh. We would have many, many, many dinners together because it was before the theater or after the theater. You know, we were joined at the hip. We would travel to do shoots. And when I started traveling with her, she had been of very much the fly in, fly out. And I was like, no, this is not fly in, fly out. And I insisted that wherever we went, we would do something. So in Milwaukee, we went to a 10 a.m. brewery, Pabst Brewery tour, and at 11 o'clock we're drinking beer. Before Uno Pizza came, and it was everywhere, and it was only deep dish pizza in Chicago. We ordered it and had it in the car back to the airport. So I was very, much of, we don't fly in, we have to do something.
Right.
Plus she had the house I mentioned. She would have us out to the house. It was on the beach. It was lovely.
How many years altogether were you working with her?
16 or 18.
Okay, wow.
I also had my own business on the side, so it was a win-win situation for me.
What do you think was Martha's biggest contribution to the world of dance?
Her photos. I mean, the history behind them, the people in them, Nureyev, Baryshnikov, Peter Martins, Darcy Kistler. I mean, I could go on and on and on, just naming all the people from that. Many of those people who've gone on to become artistic directors in ballet companies around the country. Dance Theater of Harlem. She shot. She's very, very close to Arthur Mitchell.
Right.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, when she was given an honorary Tony, I feel like it was Arthur Mitchell who introduced her, but I could be wrong.
I'll check on that. What do you know about her decision of where her photos were going to go in the end?
So before the library, she had made an arrangement with Time Life. And so it was housed there, and she would go in every day and help them to start the process of digitizing and whatnot. I don't know if I should tell this story. You know what a contact sheet looks like, right? And so the negatives go with it. Well, a lot of the things on the contact sheet are bad.
Right.
And she didn't want those to get out. But Time Life now owned it, and she really didn't have any rights. But what she would do is she would go in and she would clip the negatives of the bad ones and put them in a Tiffany bag, and then she'd walk out at the end of the day and throw them away. Because she knew that a foot was good or a foot was bad, but the everyday researcher at Time Life, oh, there's Peter Martins, so what if he's not looking good? So anyway, then Time Life closed their library, and she sort of got it all back. And that was when she made the arrangement with the library, the New York Public Library.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, now it's just a treasure trove that's
Absolutely.
so accessible.
It's fantastic.
I mean, there's the whole digital archive, which is how I first got introduced, not first introduced to her work. If you open any dance book from the second half
Right.
of the 20th century, you're going to see
Yes.
her work. But that's when I really started seeing the depth of her work. And then once I felt like I had been through a lot of the online collection, I started going in person to the archives that are not digitized. And
there's a lot, because she really didn't shoot. She did not shoot digital.
Mm-hmm.
She stopped before that happened. So none of her work is digital. It's been digitized,
Right.
but none of it was.
Right.
And for me, the wonderful thing is my archive is now there. And our archive, my work and Martha's are so intertwined because we would shoot together that I couldn't have been happier when the public library took my.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's an honor. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about Martha?
She was a character, and never married, from Waco, Texas, a little town. She went to Baylor University, and she really created her life.
Independent, self-made
Absolutely,
woman.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing
Sure.
your experiences.
Sure, thank you.
The Immortal Icons of Dance podcast is written, produced, and edited by me, Lauren Johnson. Our music is written by Shelby Rassler of Jenkins and Rassler. Technical support is generously provided by Libby Lessenhop.